Well, we now come to our main speaker, our keynote speaker, Dr. Raj Shah. And I'm going to begin by presenting him the Dean's Medal of the Fletcher School. And the Dean's Medal here is something that is given to people of extraordinary character who have also had significant impact in the international world. To give you some examples, Paul Martin, the Prime Minister of Canada, Marty Ahtisaari, the Finnish diplomat who created peace in the Balkans, Secretary of State John Kerry, etc. This is an extraordinary list of people to whom we are very proud to add the name of Dr. Raj Shah. I will talk about him momentarily, but first I'd like to call him up, present him with the Dean's Medal, and ask you to join in a great round of applause for a superb American leader. So to formally introduce Dr. Raj Shah, let me first sketch out the position he holds. He's a cabinet-level officer, attends cabinet meetings of the United States as the administrator of the Agency of International Development. Therefore, he leads the premier organization in the world that is today engaged in not only development as we understand it, but economic prosperity, good governance, human rights, global health, agriculture, environmental sustainability, education, resolving conflicts. This sounds like the shopping list for God. You are doing extraordinary work in that. I don't mean to compare you to a deity, but please take it as a sign of my esteem. I got to know Raj very personally in 2009. At that time, I was still in the Navy, and my job was commander of U.S. Southern Command, which is military activity south of the United States, to include military support to disaster relief. So in 2010, just as he had taken office, disaster struck the small nation of Haiti. 250,000 people killed. A nation destroyed is the simplest way to put it. It required a massive global mobilization of resources. USAID was on point, and at the very leading edge of that was Dr. Raj Shah. He led the military in that activity. He led our diplomats in that activity. It was a fine example of how development, and in this case disaster response, are often the keys to creating real security for our nation. Dr. Shah has also been an incredible innovator as the leader of AID. As you can see from his biography, he came from the Gates Foundation, where he was on the cutting edge of a wide variety of initiatives, and he uses a system of market approach, taking on grand challenges for development. So putting out as a challenge, how do we solve hunger? How do we solve HIV? He has continued to lead from the front with brilliant ideas of innovation. And I'll quote former Prime Minister of Great Britain, Tony Blair, who said, "Raj is a visionary but deeply practical. He realizes the purpose of aid is for long-term development, and that innovation is the key." He has done it all for his nation as a servant of development. He's a physician, trained at Penn, a undergraduate of the University of Michigan. He's the proud father of 3 beautiful children, one of whom is with us today, his youngest daughter. And he is also my very, very good friend. He's accomplished all this at the age of 41. So I assure you, we will be hearing a lot more from Dr. Raj Shah in the time to come. He is smart, kind, calm, and a leader. Dr. Raj Shah.
Wow. And good afternoon. Thank you, Dean Stavridis. It's an honor to be with the Mafia here under any circumstance. It is an extraordinarily special honor to receive the Dean's Medal from an individual who you consider one of your own heroes, and from someone who is offering this for the first time in his role as Dean. And it's something I will very, very much treasure. Thank you. I want to thank Academic Dean Ian Johnstone, Chairman Richard Thoman, Aaron Snipe, thanks for that wonderful description of what it means to serve, and my friend Farah Pandit for your, as usual, brilliant description of what we can all get done together if we just think big. There are also a contingent of USAID folks amongst the alumni that have been invited here this weekend. They include Jane Thomasy, Judy Dunbar, Yoni Bach, Hannah Fairbanks. Thanks, guys, for being here. And they're a lively and impressive group of leaders, and I hope that you will all get a chance to talk to them while they're here this weekend. As many of you know, your extraordinary dean has served on carriers, cruisers, and destroyers from Haiti to the Persian Gulf. Through his service, he has influenced not only military strategy, but also American foreign and development policy, and our nation and each of us are much stronger for his leadership. He's a poet, he's a scholar, he's a four-star admiral, and he's had the title that I consider the most impressive and coolest title an individual can have, as Supreme Allied Commander in Europe. But I'll tell you this. I will tell you this. I know Jim. I'm honored that Laura is here. And I really do try to follow and learn from Jim. And I know that the title that he is most proud of is being Dean of the Fletcher School. And that's because if you follow Jim's speeches and his readings, and if you're fortunate enough to be a student here and get to learn from him firsthand, he has always fought for the idea that far more than military prowess, transformational ideas, and the passion of young leaders willing to create change have always had a bigger influence on shaping our world for the better. So congratulations to the class of 2014 for taking forward that vision of what's possible. Congratulations to your family, your friends, your professors, and your dean, all of whom deserve our immense appreciation for fostering a new class of global leaders. You know, a few weeks ago, our deputy administrator, Mark Fierstein, Fletcher class 87, arrived in the White House Situation Room for a dead serious meeting on the crisis in Ukraine. At the table, he met a classmate from Fletcher whom he hadn't seen in 2.5 decades. They started talking about this great institution, and it turned out that a third of those folks in the sit room that day had studied in the Hall of Flags. So, I have learned that you are not referred to as the Fletcher Mafia for nothing. I got an email, "Don't be fooled," Jason Taylor wrote to me. "It's the real thing." Jason is the chief of our food assistance and hunger programs in our mission in Ethiopia. Another Fletcher grad runs our foreign disaster office. Another Fletcher grad runs our democracy and governance programs. Andy Sisson, the development of our newly founded U.S. Global Development Lab, an institution designed to bring technology and science and innovation to the practice of solving the world's most difficult problems, is a Fletcher alum. So is Alex Thier, our senior-most policy leader, building literally a coalition of global leaders to come together and agree to end extreme poverty within 2 decades, following on President Obama's call that we all do so. Nearly every major initiative we've launched, frankly, at USAID, of which I'm very proud, seems to be run by a Fletcher grad. And it wasn't fully, I didn't fully appreciate this until I was preparing to be here today, that I really internalized the power that you all hold over our agency. In fact, all along, I thought I was in charge. Now, we're not an anomaly. From diplomacy to law to the military, and increasingly in the area of business, Fletcher graduates are bringing a sharp analytical eye, intense curiosity, and unrivaled passion to the conduct of global affairs. Here in Medford, you develop not just the skills and knowledge, but also the confidence to be change makers in our world. When the earthquake the Admiral spoke to reduced Port-au-Prince to rubble almost instantaneously, Fletcher students didn't just donate money or send used clothing. You staffed the Fletcher Situation Room around the clock, just as you had during the violent days during the 2007 Kenyan elections. And you helped geolocate thousands of victims desperately pleading for help and assistance. When graduating students Andrew Lala and Tommy Galloway decided that they wanted to make a difference in the lives of poor families in Africa, they didn't buy a vacation package that let them volunteer at an orphanage. They wrote a business plan. They figured out that if you could use bus routes to better distribute solar lamps to remote communities, where every evening nightfall would otherwise cast thriving towns back to the 12th century, you could make a difference. Today, thousands of entrepreneurs just like them are building startup companies all around the world, trying to do well by doing good. When graduating student Roxanne Cristalli when Roxanne saw how violence and rape is used as a weapon of war, even in seemingly safe spaces, in refugee camps and IDP camps around the world, and what risk that puts young girls in precisely at times of crises, she didn't just write a paper. She started a movement. By introducing new coursework and welcoming new voices to campus, the Gender Initiative at Fletcher has helped us all better understand how violence and inequality impacts men and women, boys and girls, and how we, policymakers, can do a better job of protecting girls at times of crises. Thank you, Roxanne. So, there's no doubt about it. You are an extraordinary class. You have the confidence, the vision, and the optimism, and you've been in an environment that clearly nurtures those leadership qualities and inspires you to think boldly. As you leave Fletcher and enter or return to the professional world, you'll certainly find that not everyone will encourage such boldness of spirit. You'll hear that your optimism at times is naive. You'll be told to slow down. Sometimes you'll be encouraged to wait until you have more experience, more losses under your belt, before you'll really understand how the world works. Now, I know that I don't have 4 decades of professional experience from which to share some grand insights with you about your life and your career. But I do have one piece of advice, and that's be patient, smile when you hear that comment, hear them out, but don't give up and don't give in. Because naive optimism is precisely what you'll need and precisely what the rest of us are counting on if we're going to realize the extraordinary leaps of progress that would have been imaginable just a decade ago. In my own life, it's been the moments of extremely naive optimism that have proven to be the most rewarding. I left medical school against the advice of some of my professors to volunteer on Al Gore's presidential campaign because at the time, I really believed that driving people back and forth from the airport would somehow change the world. And we all know how that turned out. But it was fun, and I made lifelong friends that continue to inspire me. In a junior role at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, colleagues and I had a ridiculously naive idea that you could sell immunization bonds in the private capital markets. Before anyone started helping us, most folks told us we were crazy and uninformed, and they were mostly right. But 10 years and $6 billion later, immunization bonds have helped to raise resources to vaccinate over 100 million children, and 4 million child lives have been saved. More recently, we took on President Obama's call to end hunger in the aftermath of a devastating global food, fuel, and financial crisis that had shrouded the world in pessimism when the president took office. This coming week, Monday morning, we will announce that our efforts over these past 4 years have helped dozens of countries change their policies, mobilized more than $7.2 billion in private investment for poor agrarian economies, created dozens of new breakthrough seeds and fertilizers, and resulted in 12.5 million children moving out of hunger, not because we ever gave them a single food item, but because their families are more profitable as commercial, small-scale farmers. I can tell you that for each of these successes, I have an even longer list of failures. Moments when the skeptics were proven right, moments when our big ideas did not take hold, and moments when we tried to learn from failure as opposed to celebrate success. And it's at times like that that I have to remind myself of the answer to a simple question. The question is, do you know which professional athlete missed the most basketball shots in the history of the NBA? I think I just heard the answer. The answer is Michael Jordan. In fact, he missed the most game-winning would-have-been buzzer-beater shots as well. And I've always wondered why our greatest athletes are encouraged to take risks, celebrated when they succeed, supported when they fail. Meanwhile, our efforts in diplomacy, in defense, in development, in humanitarian affairs are held to ridiculously high standards that sometimes undermine our ability to think big, try new things, and change the world. USAID's mission, which is to deliver on President Obama's call to end extreme poverty in the next 2 decades, fundamentally requires the unyielding optimism and the courage to take risks that I see in this tent today. Because this goal is now achievable, but only if all of us, students, entrepreneurs, faith leaders, conservative senators, liberal Democrats, government ministers, all act together. We can end extreme poverty for the 1.2 billion people who live on $1.25 a day. We can end it for the 860 million people, the majority of whom are children, who will go to sleep hungry tonight. And we can end it for the 6.6 million children who will die this year before ever celebrating their 5th birthday. As terrible as these numbers are, they do not adequately describe what poverty is and what extreme poverty does. It drains our basic human dignity. And if we're being honest, it sometimes drains our compassion for those who suffer. But there is good news. On continent after continent, a smaller share of people live this way than at any other time in our history. From 1990 to 2010, child mortality fell by half. The number of children in primary school grew to 90%. and around 2 billion people gained access to clean water. Since 1999, the total number of those living in extreme poverty has declined by nearly 50 million people every year on average, despite a growing global population. Projections of what we can achieve differ, but most experts agree that reducing the number of people living in extreme suffering from 1.2 billion today to 200 million people by 2030, roughly 3% of the global population at that time, is an ambitious but achievable target. Just imagine for a moment what the world looks like if we succeed in this quest. Girls and boys go to sleep every night with their bellies full of nutritious foods that fuels their mind as much as their body. They go to school every day free from the daily terror of being sold off as child brides or conscripted as child soldiers. And they turn on the lights when they get home, with energy sourced from wind farms and geothermal stations in a manner that protects our climate and ensures these gains can be sustained. As they survive and thrive, we know birth rates go down and countries experience a demographic dividend that creates jobs and spurs economic progress. I see new partnerships creating this virtuous cycle of growth and opportunity every day. I've met Nepali scientists who are working with us to harness remote sensing data that enables farmers to estimate their crop yields and plan for floods. And I am excited someone is cheering about remote sensing data. I've met Senegalese farmers who are planting drought-resistant seeds, using mobile phones to compare prices from different local markets, and buying weather index crop insurance thanks to gains in new actuarial science capabilities that are enabling large insurance companies to put risk mitigation under hundreds of millions of very vulnerable people. And in Colombia, where communities have endured 5 decades of intense violence, I met with graduate students just like yourselves whose research on land tenure galvanized the government into action. Over the next 10 years, we will help 360,000 families displaced by conflict regain title to their land and access to credit, boosting incomes and replacing swords with plowshares. Colombia, Nepal, and Senegal have each brought the rate of extreme poverty down so far and so fast that they can now envision fully eliminating it by the end of the next decade. And they are not alone. Around the world, nations once defined by widespread poverty, endemic conflict, and disease are replacing that suffering with dignity and opportunity. Today, 6 of the 10 fastest growing nations in the world are in sub-Saharan Africa, and 2/3 of future global growth will come from emerging markets. What this means is that during your careers, this underlying trend will transform our world, motivating massive pools of capital, talent, creativity, and entrepreneurship to come from unlikely places that will reshape the balance of power and offer billions of additional people real opportunity to be part of a safe and connected world. The impact of these trends on America's security and prosperity is unfortunately not preordained. It depends on actions we take and you take today. Because let's be honest, not every country looks like Nepal, Senegal, or Colombia. Not every community has leaders who believe in our values, in the inherent dignity of every single human being, or who stand strong against the tempting forces of corruption, extremism, or kleptocracy. Our goal to advance the cause of justice by ending extreme poverty has some fine print. As more nations successfully end extreme poverty, the challenge before us will narrow and toughen. That's why people are understandably skeptical. That's why many of you may find me naively optimistic when I suggest it. Because you know that by 2020, extreme poverty will become concentrated in countries like Haiti and Bangladesh, where the rising tides and growing tempests of climate change exact pressure on the communities least able to cope. In countries like Nigeria, Kenya, and Yemen, as we've seen in just the last few weeks, hopefulness for peace and prosperity can be quickly undermined by extremist ideology and criminal behavior. And in countries like Syria and South Sudan, where leaders who have a choice between perpetual conflict and lasting peace often choose repeatedly conflict. Conflict is essentially development and human progress in reverse. It destroys capital, scares away investment, displaces families, denies human dignity, and unravels the fabric of social life. In order to confront these realities, we need to recognize that development and humanitarian affairs are fundamentally a political process, not a technical one. We've not always thought this way. 15, 10, even 5 years ago, development professionals fought to keep their work insulated from politics. But ending hunger is not just about new seeds. It requires leaders who are willing to reform the seed sector, give women ownership to land and capital, and unlock resources for underserved parts of their countries. Ensuring that every child has a light to read by at night doesn't just require distributing low-cost solar lanterns. It takes leaders who will build public-private partnerships, attract investment, and do regional deals to change the landscape in broad terms. And as you know, strengthening democracy is not just about supporting and monitoring elections, but about leaders who are empowered, who fight corruption, who encourage women to join social and political process, and who are willing to stand up for the rights of minorities precisely at the time when it's politically most expedient to do the opposite. Precisely because the Fletcher Mafia, as I've learned today, is so real and so powerful, we know that you will have a great influence on how our leaders act and think. If we're going to end extreme poverty, it will be your generation, your class of graduates that takes it across the finish line. This is your moonshot and your opportunity to lead. Those of you who go back to your countries and become ministers in your government will have to remember that even in the trappings of success, your mission is to fight for those who are most vulnerable. Those of you who join the Foreign Service at state or USAID, even as you work your way up those systems and meet extraordinarily impressive colleagues, you'll need to focus relentlessly on data, on accountability, on results, and remember what brought you into that service. Those of you who become business leaders will need to take your motivation developed here at Fletcher into the boardrooms and decision rooms where you make decisions about how to allocate capital and where to invest. But all of you, and this is harder than it sounds, will have to somehow stay connected to the spirit of compassion and service that is so evident on this campus this weekend. As you go forward in your careers, you may find the greatest challenge is not only being a good leader in your field or area of service, but also in your personal life. This is an area where I've been trying to get better myself, as my daughter can attest to. Or maybe she can't. To listen more carefully, to hear all perspectives before making decisions, to find meaning and love in everyday tasks, to better support the people I care about at work and at home, and above all, to say thank you. I know there's more I can do to improve every interaction I have and create more room for my family and my colleagues to shine. I have a somewhat blunt-talking leadership coach who asks me every day to send him a list of scores, 1 through 10, on my progress on these types of metrics. It's a self-assessment exercise, not actually of daily performance. It's not about how I did, but on whether I did my best to try my hardest to perform in these areas. If I'm being honest, it takes somewhere between 30 seconds and 2 minutes to do every day, and yet every day I try instinctively not to do it because it's tough. You all are special leaders and special people. The reality is that you are the only person who can ever hold yourself to account, especially when it's about your personal values and your own behavior. When you do, you reap not only the rewards of professional accomplishments, but also those of being a stronger, better friend, son or daughter or parent. With a fine education and an unparalleled network that you all call a mafia, you have an incredible path ahead of you. As you write the next chapter of human history, please nurture the sense of optimism, confidence, and compassion that brought you to Fletcher. Remember that your lives have a calling and a purpose in service to each other. And as you do, I promise that your leadership will inspire leaps of progress for generations to come. Congratulations, Fletcher class of 2014. I look forward to serving with you, and let's be honest, probably serving for you one day. Thank you.